So before we begin, I would like to ask you to turn to the person sitting next to you and shake their hand like this. You know the handshake I mean, this kind of handshake, and say, "It's good to see you." And please make sure, if there's anyone nearby who's sitting by themselves, please reach out to them and do the same. Say, "It's good to see you." Okay, I assume everybody's covered. So I research backlash to climate policy because I want to know how we can make climate policy that is both ambitious and acceptable to people. And like many of us, I found it really confronting in recent years when we've seen instances of protests and pushback against climate and environmental policy. In other words, backlash. And so this makes me wonder, what can we learn from these examples of where things have gone wrong in order to better make and implement climate policy? How do I change the slide? Does anybody know? There we go. Thank you very much. Okay, whoa. So we've seen instances of backlash to climate policy in recent years. In Australia, in the top left, in Canada, in France with the yellow vests, initially triggered by climate policy. And we've also seen similar things happen in other areas of environmental policy, of course with the nitrogen issue here in the Netherlands, but also rollbacks of policy protecting the Amazon in Brazil, and the rollback of an attack on many environmental and climate policies in the US under Trump. And these situations can be really confronting. After long struggles to get climate policy passed, suddenly people push back and reject it in ways that can often feel quite extreme and beyond what we might think of as ordinary disagreement. And so the question becomes, why do some policies trigger hostility and resentment, and what can we do to avoid it? And this is really a problem because if policies are removed, issues go unaddressed, and politicians become afraid to take further action. And I want to argue that to avert backlash, we need to approach climate action from the perspective of solidarity, not only economically, but also socially and culturally. And this is because climate action can touch people's lives in many different ways. It can raise deep questions, it can create anxieties, and this can easily be taken advantage of by populists and others opposed to climate action. So we need to address this proactively. But why a specific climate policy does or does not trigger backlash is a bit complicated. And we can think of several factors that are involved. The first is economic factors, so costs that people bear. So this could be energy prices, it could be the cost of new devices or other kinds of fees and charges. But importantly, it's not just these costs, but it's what these costs come to mean. So a relatively small increase in prices in one situation might be accepted, but somewhere else it might be considered completely unacceptable. So it's got this kind of symbolic character as well. We can also think about what I term everyday practices. So this is how climate policy kind of clashes with the situations or the circumstances in our everyday life. Can we heat our homes and cool our homes differently? Do we have access to work, services, leisure nearby, or do we have to travel far to access these things? Do we have viable public transport that makes change easy or not? Sorry, I'm having problems with this. The third set of factors we can think about, less talked about, are what I term cultural factors. And this refers to the ways in which climate action sort of comes to mean something to people and the way it relates to people's sense of self. So researchers have observed that traditional notions of masculinity can be associated with a desire to drive gasoline cars or value certain kinds of work. But for all of us, climate action can create tensions with things that we value. The ways we interact with family and friends, the ways we travel, work, our sense of place and community. And if climate action clashes in these kinds of ways for people, in ways that they feel they can't accept, then it creates discontent and pushback, which could lead to backlash. But not all climate policy leads to backlash. Sometimes it can be successful. What can we learn from these policies too? And in recent years, we've seen examples, important examples, of where things might unfold differently. So one example is negotiations to phase out fossil fuel production in places like Germany and Canada and Spain. And researchers have observed how negotiations between governments, unions, businesses and communities can lead to agreements that support communities to transition. And there's also been major policy developments in Europe and the United States. The European Green Deal creates major new investment for communities and industries to transition. And the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States creates major incentives for the uptake of renewable energy, including in rural areas, to try to build broad support and momentum. So they're very much learning from backlash about how to do climate policy differently. And this could well prove to be a winning formula, at least to take a next big step forward. But I think we also need to think about how climate action can impact or can touch people's lives in different ways. Climate action, of course, means phasing out fossil fuel production. Creating green jobs is crucial, but this can also create anxiety for people who feel affected by that. I mean, don't we all want to feel valuable to society and care for our communities? It also means phasing out combustion vehicles. And this is really interesting and exciting to see how quickly things are changing. But some people might be worried about how they can care for people they love without the resources to keep up. And of course, climate change might also mean giving up flying, or at least severely flying less. But of course, many of us find that enriching and see that it brings benefits to society by learning from people that are different from us. So it's important to recognise that climate change can kind of pull people in different directions. And this makes me think about the human dimensions of climate change. And I think of this here, this mural. Does anybody know where this is? Nowhere? No one, sorry. This is Heerlen in the south of the Netherlands. Apologies if I don't pronounce that very well. But this is a place, for anyone who doesn't know, that used to have coal mining, but that ended a long time ago. And so this is the kind of story that we can learn from. So this mural makes me think about solidarity. It makes me think about, to me, it suggests hope for the future while also recognizing the past. And this is really important for how we can learn about what transitions involve, because transitions are not just a few years. Transitions involve social and economic and cultural changes that might take a really long time. But if we're serious about climate action, then we should imagine that it's our town, our family, our friends who are affected and who need our solidarity and support. So although I would like to leave you with the previous idea of solidarity, I instead want to leave you with this image. This is what I think of when I think about the transformations that need to happen and that are happening under climate change. Things will be complex and messy. There'll be resistance, and yes, even backlash. But that's exactly why we need to approach climate action from the perspective of solidarity. And this is really important in order to undercut the appeals of, say, populists and others who would oppose climate action, who can take the anxieties of people and turn them around against further action. So looking forward, I would say that we really should think more about these human dimensions of climate action, not just focus on the economics, but also these social and cultural dimensions. And it's hard to think about what solidarity might mean, but it's something that I think we can all engage in, and we all need to engage in looking forward. It won't necessarily be a complete solution, but it is a really important part. Thank you.